Does it work for all families? And this is a question that was posed to us early on, which said, does it make a difference whether you're a better communicator or not, or whether the family has better monitoring skills or not? And we've looked at this. And so when you look at this figure, what we see is this yellow line represents parents who did not have the materials. The red line represents parents that did have the materials. These are parents that at the beginning, before they got the materials, that were poor communicators, below average. These are parents in the middle who are typical everyday moms and dads. No special skills whatsoever, they're just average. And then these were the stronger communicating parents in the beginning of the study. And when we see, if we look at the parents that got the materials, the weaker communicators, their kids drank more than the stronger communicators. So when they get the materials, the parents who communicate better, they do better. Those kids do better. But if we look at them compared to the parents that we call in our control group, that vary along those dimensions, every scenario where they had the booklet and they read that, it was better than every scenario of families where they didn't. So what this really speaks to is that these materials, when read, even in homes where communication is poor initially, those homes are better off than the strongest communicating families that don't have these materials. And this happens when we look at other parenting behaviors. So that was communication. This is the amount of monitoring that goes on, and we see the same pattern occur. This is where you know and where your kids. And then we look at parental approval, where parents vary in how much they think it's okay for their kids to be drinking. Same kind of thing, that no matter what the situation is, after parents have read these materials and talked to the kids, they're better than when they haven't. So the question that was asked of us then is, well, why is it working? What seems to be the reasons why this works? Because we know it works, and that I gave you some examples. These are other studies have shown similar patterns. We know it works for, by and large, all families. Although it might work better for some than others, it works better for families that get it than don't. Why is it working? What's going on? Well, it turns out that I go back to the earlier slide where we had different components. So we looked to change things like attitudes about drinking activity, attitudes about non-drinking activities, positive beliefs that they might hold with regard to drinking. And each of these parts are represented in these materials, and we have science that shows that these are important things in terms of regulation and problem solving. And when we do studies, we notice these are the things that change. These are the areas that the intervention changes the beliefs, the attitudes, the decision-making tasks that have to go on, which in turn then affect behavior. So we know that it works. We know that it works for most part, all types of families. We also know that it works because the specific components that are represented in the booklet are also influencing the way that kids make choices. And so therefore what we believe is it's then strengthening the paths between the emotional centers of the brain and the higher education, the higher processing centers. You know, the truth is we'd want to test this, but in order to do that, we'd have to cut kids' brains open and look at them, and I don't think many parents would let us do that, you know, so we'll have to, for now, be happy with just looking at what we call proxies for the brain change behavior. We also know that it works in high-risk environments. So we know that there are certain areas of our country where there's heavier drinking or more problems. So we've been asked by the people in those areas, can we use these materials? And then they have, and we've studied their drinking afterwards, and we see similar patterns. The gray bars, the families that don't get the materials, are higher risk than the families that get the materials. And it's through a variety of different outcomes. Once again, it suggests that even in the high-risk environments, where there's more influence to drink, we can have a difference. We also looked at it at high-risk individuals. We know that there are certain kids who have factors that make them more vulnerable. And so the question is, will it work for them? And we tested the difference between a parent-only, a peer-based one, a combination. And this was called the GOAL study because the specific high-risk kids that we were working with were students who were athletes. And we know in the United States that students that are athletes tend to drink heavier and more frequently than students that are non-athletes. Oftentimes we think of sports as a way to get kids involved in activities where there's adult role models. It gives them something to do, it gives them structure, but somewhere along the way, those very activities become higher risk activities in terms of alcohol and drug use. So we found that it makes a difference similarly that way. Again, well, these are supposed to be gray bars. The non-red bars are the families that didn't get the materials, where the red bars are the families that did get the materials. So even for at-risk individuals, we see the difference there. We've also looked at profiles because we've been counting in the field, we've been counting drinks for a long time. So we say, how many drinks does the kids drink when they drink? And if you look at this slide, you could have two different people and they both drink 6 drinks, but one person drinks 1 drink a day and they're at low risk. Another person drinks 6 drinks all at once and they're at higher risk for problems. So just simply counting drinks and saying this intervention makes a difference and it lowers the number of drinks is probably not enough. We need to look at the way they're drinking that creates the most problems. So we've identified through very sophisticated statistical means profiles. So we know there are different kinds of kids with respect to drinking. One profile, and these are the different ways that we measure drinking, and we ask all the kids these different methods of consumption, and we come up with different profiles. The first profile are what we consider our non-drinker type, because no matter what way we ask them, they say we don't drink. They don't drink heavy, they don't get drunk, they don't have these kind of issues that go on. The second profile are young kids that drink, but they drink on weekends and they drink light. So they're kind of experimenting, if you will, but they don't get drunk. So they don't have the problems yet. So you have your non-drinking group, you have your light drinking group. The third group also drinks on weekends, but they drink heavily on weekends. So the thing that distinguishes them from that previous group is that while they're drinking on weekends, they are getting drunk, they are reaching blood alcohol concentrations that put them at risk, and so on. So although they both drink on weekends, if we were asked that question, to separate that out, we can see that one's at higher risk than the other. And that last group there, not only drinks on weekends heavily, but they drink during the week heavily. So they represent a much higher risk group. So the question is, now that we have these different profiles, what happens when you give the materials to parents? How does it affect those profiles? Because we'd have 2 goals here. One goal would be that we want to reduce, one goal would be that we'd want to keep the non-drinkers and the light drinkers in those groups. We wouldn't want them to, as they get older, to transition to heavier groups. The other goal that we'd have is we want to take kids that are in the heavier drinking groups and have them transition out. Now, we always think of these materials as prevention, preventing the problems. But our prevention could also be treatment for kids that have already started, that have already engaged in heavy patterns. And the real test would be, can these materials sort of reverse those courses? And the answer to that question, I wouldn't be here if I was going to say no. The answer to that question is, they do. We found 2 types of findings, and we published this recently in January, and I don't have a picture of the article. Emmanuel thought ahead, and he showed you the article, and I don't have the picture of it. You just have to trust me on this one. It's there. It's in the January issue of the Journal of Studies in Alcohol and Drugs. But we found that we kept kids from transitioning over time into the heavier groups. And we actually got kids that were in the heavier groups to transition out of them. So how does parenting work to reduce this? And the answer is, yeah, it affects that. And it's not like once kids are far gone and they start drinking, parents can't make a difference. In fact, they can. They could read these materials, they could talk to their sons and daughters, they could use the materials as the basis for the conversations to actually get their kids who are already drinking to transition back into healthier lifestyles. I think the combination of the science that we have here shows that there's some pretty good benefits that way.